Nevertheless, they are very persuasive because Job 9:24, the earth is given into the hand of the wicked. They have the power over the earth. It says he covereth the faces of the judges thereof. So if he covered the faces of the judges by putting his face up there, it's not truth he's not going to cover. He's going to cover, if he's going to cover, through something called iconoclasm or iconoclast, which is the defacing of the images, and put his face up. It's not, it even tells us that in the book of Maccabees, it's not the truth that he's not going to hide. And the reason why the Apocrypha is so what's the word I'm looking for? So threatening to Esau is because it goes into history in there that, is not really fully spoken of in the scriptures, like the history of the Greeks, and when the Greeks came into power through Alexander the Greek, and how wickedness increased after they started to multiply, and taking control over the different regions of the earth. The history of the Hellenization of the Greeks, which gives us the true understanding of when the scriptures say there's no difference between Jew or Greek. Now we understand that clearly. And the reason why there's no difference between the Jew and the Greek is just simply because they're both Israelites. Just one was, speaking the Hebrew, the other one was speaking the Greek. But on a family scale, they're both the same. And just one.
All right, Shalom. I want to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh Bahasham, Yahweh Shai Bahasham Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone who taught me this truth. Double salutations to all you Akim out there laboring. The house of David, the elect, that's pushing his word with all truth, righteousness, and sincerity. Shalom to you, brothers. Shalom to the elect. I'm back at you with another quick lesson through the Holy Spirit, the Rakakwadash. And I was watching this lesson from Elder Apostle Ramlab. He made some quick and heavy points detailing the biblical history that's found in the Apocrypha, which these devils removed, And one thing that we have learned from our apostles and elders, in order to understand the mystery, you have to know the history, okay? And part of that history is the Hellenization of Israel, all right? Those scattered Israelites that were taking on the customs and languages of the Greeks, which is also found in the Apocrypha. And when you have that insight, it also gives you clarity, to the mystery of the Gentiles, okay? Because the Gentiles that were forwarded this word, were those Israelite foreigners, who believed. You see what I'm saying? But as the elder apostle was saying, we have that clarity, when the scriptures say there's no difference between the Jew or Greek because they're both Israelites. Okay, let's go there real quick. All right, because Christians, these like the elders say, the wacky tacky Christians, they'll use this scripture to justify, the covenants and promises. The covenants and promises have been guaranteed to the heathen nations as well. And that shows you they don't understand the scriptures, because the spirit of Yahweh Shema Shai is not dealing with these Christians, man. All right, this is Romans chapter 10. I want to make a point on that. This is Romans chapter 10. And verse 12, and it reads, it says, for there is no difference between the Jew and the Greek, okay, because they're both Israelites, as the apostle said. One knew the Hebrew, the other one didn't. One was raised in the customs and the laws, one wasn't. And those in the circumcision, they looked at those Israelite foreigners, those Greeks, if you will, as heathen. Right? But they were both Israelites. It says, for there is no difference between the Jew and the Greek, for the same Lord over all is rich unto all that call upon him. Verse 13, it says, for whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord, Yahweh Shema Shai, shall be saved. And this is what they run to. Well, they say whosoever, but that's actually talking about Israel. Okay? This word is for the Israelites and none else. Let's make that point. Okay? And that never changed. Salvation is for Israel, starting with the elect. Real quick, Joel 2 and 27. Let's go there. All right. This is Joel chapter 2 and verse 27. And it reads, it says, and ye should know that I am in the midst of Israel, and that I am the Lord, Yahweh Shem Yahushai, your power and none else. And my people shall never be ashamed. And that never changed. All right. Malachi, 3 and 6. I am the Lord, Yahweh Shem Yahushai. I change not, and therefore you sons of Jacob are not consumed. Okay. Same chapter, jumping down. All right. Joel 2 and 32. It says, and it shall come to pass that whosoever shall call on the name of the Lord, Yahweh Shem Yahushai, shall be delivered. Right. The point, for in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem shall be deliverance. Right. Salvation, deliverance is only for the Israelites. Okay. For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem shall be deliverance, as the Lord, Yahweh Shem Yahushai, have said, and in the remnant whom the Lord, Yahweh Shem Yahushai, shall call. So not only is salvation for the nation of Israel, but starting with what? The elect, that remnant whom the Lord shall call. Okay? So basically that's how you get around, you know, that argument that these Christians try to make to say that, you know, that salvation was open to all nations, right? Because they're not going into the history. Let's go there too. Going back into the time of the Maccabees, right? During the time of the Hellenization of Israel, right? So getting straight to the point here, this is First Maccabees, okay? This is biblical history. This is world history found right here in the Apocrypha. All right, getting straight to the point. This is Maccabees, First Maccabees chapter 1, and we'll start at here we go. We'll start at 7. And it reads, it says, so Alexander reigned 12 years, then he died. All right, going into what? The establishment of the Greek Empire. All right, also in Daniel chapter 7, verse 6, you know, that third beast, which was likened unto a leopard. All right, going to Alexander the Greek. So it says, First Maccabees 1 and 7, so Alexander reigned 12 years and then died, and his servants bare rule, everyone in his place, right? And those servants go back to what? Those 4 generals. Okay, Cassander, Lacomaeus, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. All right. It says, and after his death, they all put crowns upon themselves. So did their sons after them many years, and evils were multiplied in the earth. All right. So it all began at the time of the Greeks. You know, that third beast in Daniel 7 and 6. Okay. It says, and there came out of them a wicked root, Antiochus, or Antiochus, however you want to pronounce it. Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes, son of Antiochus the king, who had been hostage at Rome, and he reigned in the 137th, the 137th, in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks. So Antiochus, right? So real quick, let's pull this up. Okay, this is from the Bible Dictionary. All right, going back to that time of the Hellenization as we're reading here. All right, Antiochus. So it says here, the kingdom of the Seleucids. Okay, because Antiochus was out of the, he was from the Seleucid line, right? And they ruled over Syria, you know. It says, and then also you had Ptolemy, all right, that was down in Egypt, you know. But it says that the Hellenistic world. So it says Grecians, right? It says Grecians were Greek-speaking Jews. You see that? Folk of the dispersion from areas predominantly Greek, all right? The diaspora, going back to the scattering. So these were Greek-speaking Israelites. Those were the Grecians, man, right? Jews, folk of the dispersion, real quick. And I'll go back to that First Maccabees. All right. This is First Peter chapter 1, verse 1, and it reads, it says, Peter, an apostle of Yahushua HaMashiach, to the strangers scattered throughout Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. All right. So who are these strangers that were scattered? Let's pull this up. Okay, that word diaspora, right? And it says a scattering, dispersion of Israelites dispersed among foreign nations. You see that? Right? Folks of the, what did this say? Folks of the Jews of the dispersion. Okay, Israelites dispersed among foreign nations. All right, we were scattered amongst the heathen. It says of the Christians, the anointed, which are the Israelites, scattered abroad amongst the Gentiles. You see that? You know, those are the folks, the Jews of the dispersion, right? Bear with me. All right, it says, used of the Israelites dispersed among foreign nations, especially of their Babylonian exile, right? It says, unto those dispersed among the Greeks. You see that? Unto those dispersed among the Greeks, it says transferred to Christians, i.e. Jewish Christians, right? Scattered abroad among the Gentiles. James 1:1, you see? James, a servant of Yahweh Shem Yahushai and the Lord, Yahweh Shah HaMashiach, to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad, greeting. See? All Israelites, man. Okay, and this shows you again, right? Let's get that real quick. This is Matthew 15:24. This is what Yahweh Shah said to the disciples. Matthew 15:24 says, but he answered and said, I am not sent but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel. All right. So these Israelites, you know, were a product of the dispersion. These Israelites that were lost, that needed to come back. You know, these were the Gentiles that were forwarded the word, man. Okay, it's not talking about the actual natural Gentiles, the heathen. All right, but these Israelite foreigners that were scattered, that were lost. All right. So anyway, going back, right? So it says, so we have understanding on that. Okay. And reading on, this is First Maccabees 1:11. It says, in those days, it says, in those days went out, Salakia, excuse me. It says, in those days went there out of Israel wicked men. Okay. Wicked men who persuaded many, saying, let us go and make a covenant with the heathen that are round about us. For since we departed from them, we have had much sorrow. So you had pretty much, all right, you had Jake, you know, selling out. All right. So at this point here, this is when the Israelites became Hellenized. You know, they took on the customs and languages of the Greeks, you know, and they were pushing that amongst Israel to basically, you know, to sell out. Okay. It said Israel, there went out of Israel wicked men who persuaded many. You see, it says, so this device pleased them well, right? Verse 13, it says, then certain of the people were so forward herein that they went to the king, who gave them license to do after the ordinances of the heathen. You see that? So they got license to do after the ordinance of the heathen. This is when we begin to start to fall away from our heritage. You know, we begin to take on that Greek culture. You know, it says, whereupon they built a place of exercise at Jerusalem according to the customs of the heathen. All right, which goes back to and you can look it up. It goes back to the gymnasium, and they used to train naked. You know, you got to look up what's it called, gymnos. That word gymnasium goes back to the Greek gymnos, which means to train naked. Okay, and this goes back to what Jake taking on that Greek culture, man, taking on the ways of the Greeks. All right, verse 14 it says, wherefore, Salakia, verse 15 it says, and made themselves uncircumcised, right, and forsook the holy covenant and joined themselves to the heathen, and were sold to do mischief. Right, so this is how we fell away. You know, Jake sold out, man, took on the ways of the Greeks. You know, and that was the decree that came from Antiochus, because if we were caught practicing our customs, All right, we were put to death. Matter of fact, let's jump down. All right. This is verse, straight to the point. Let's go down to verse 41. All right, going into that Hellenization. Okay. So this is First Maccabees chapter 1, verse 41, and it reads, it says, moreover, King Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people. All right, going back to that one world government spirit, man. You know, he was pushing this back then. It says, and everyone should leave his laws, you see? And everyone should leave his laws. So all the heathen agreed according to the commandment of the king, right? To become Hellenized, man, to take on the customs and ways of the Greeks. It says, yea, many also of the Israelites consented to his religion, you see? They were with it. And sacrificed unto idols and profaned the Sabbath. Verse 44. It says, for the king has sent letters by messengers unto Jerusalem and the cities of Judah, that they should follow the strange laws of the land, and forbid burnt offerings and sacrifice and drink offerings in the temple, and that they should profane the Sabbaths and festival days. You see, it says, reading on, because all this was going on from Antiochus to stop our connection, you know, with Yahweh Shem Yahushai, you know, like it tells you in Psalm 62. And I believe verse 4, you know, that their inward thought is to, you know, to cast us away from our excellency, you know, to disconnect us from our power, you know. And that's what happened, you know, when we began, when we started to fall away, you know. It says, and pollute the sanctuary in the holy temple. Verse 47, and set up altars and groves and chapels of idols and sacrifice swine's flesh. See? It says, and sacrifice swine's flesh and unclean beast, you know. So Antiochus separated Israel from their culture, man. Right, as we're reading the destruction of Jerusalem, finishing it out, it says that they should also leave their children uncircumcised and make their souls abominable with all the manner of unclean and profanation, to the end that they might forget the law and change all the ordinances, you see. So we became full-blown heathen, all right, at this time of that conversion through of Antiochus, right, which was by force. Verse 50, it says, and whosoever would not do according to the commandment of the king, he said, he should die. You see that? So that's what happened, you know, when we became, you know, those Gentiles, right? Going back to, we read that definition of the Grecians, right? Grecians were Greek-speaking Jews, folks of the dispersion from areas predominantly Greek, right? Let's get some more, you know, because the Lord set us up to make it make sense. Okay, we know when the scriptures say, like the apostle said, you know, we know the difference between, there's no difference between the Jew and the Greek because they're both Israelites. Okay, this is Acts chapter 6 and verse 1, and it reads, it says, and in those days when the number of the disciples was multiplied, there arose murmuring of the Grecians against the Hebrews, you see, because their widows were neglected in the daily ministration. All right, so those Grecians, let's look it up. Okay, Hellenistes, right? You see, a Hellen is one who imitates the manners and customs or worship of the Greeks and use the Greek tongue. The point, used in the New Testament of Jews born in foreign lands and speaking Greeks. These were Israelites, man. Okay, these were those Jews. Let's pull this up, man. All right, this is from the book Nature Knows No Color Line. All right, this is from page 32 and 33. Gets into the history of the Negroes in ancient Greece. Okay, those Israelite foreigners, right? You know, so that's who this message was forwarded to, man. It wasn't talking about the actual heathen, right? You had Jake all up in those lands, man. right? That believed, that were converted, right? Using the New Testament, Jews born in foreign lands and speaking Greek, right? Plain. Okay, this is Acts chapter 9. Okay. Straight to the point. Acts chapter 9 and Acts chapter 9 and 26, it says that when Saul was come to Jerusalem, he essayed to join himself to the disciples. They were all afraid of him and believed not that he was a disciple. But Barnabas took him and brought him into the apostles and declared unto them how he had seen the Lord in the way, and that he had spoken to him, and how he had preached boldly at Damascus in the name of Yahushai. And when he was with them coming in and going out at Jerusalem, and he spake boldly in the name of the Lord, Yahweh Shem Yahushai, and disputed against the Grecians, right? But they went about to slay him. You see? And those Grecians, those Israelites that were taking on the ways of the Greeks, man. You know, that were in a Gentile state of mind. It says, which when the brethren knew, they brought him down to Caesarea and sent him forth to Tarsus, man. So the point, man, we understand who those Greeks or Grecians are, right? John 12 and 20, Greeks seek Yahushai. Okay, these were Israelites, man, and there were certain Greeks among them that came up to worship at the feast. There came the same came therefore to Philip, which was at Bethsaida of Galilee, and desired him, saying, Sir, we would see Yahushai. Philip cometh and telleth Andrew, and again Andrew and Philip telleth Yahushai. And Yahushua answered them, saying, the hour is come that the Son of Man should be glorified. So these were Israelites, man. No way around that, man. So that's pretty much the point. You know, that's kind of what came to my mind as I was listening to the lesson from Elder Apostle Ramlap. You know, so we have that clarity, man. You know, but I pray that this lesson was edifying. I want to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham Rakakwadash, and double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone who taught me this truth, and double salutation to all you Akim out there laboring. Hey, Shalom.